Here, lizard.
What's going on, fish nerds, and welcome back. Please excuse the discoloration in the tank behind me. Unfortunately, our angelfish gill appears to have contracted some kind of parasite, so we are treating for that, getting that all taken care of, getting him back to a clean bill of health. But he's gonna be fine. He's gonna be just fine. We're getting it all taken care of. However, I do want to share something with you guys. I watched KG Tropical's video the other day about mistakes that people have made in the fish keeping hobby. He did one video of his own mistakes, and then he did a video of several different YouTubers sharing the mistakes that they've made. And so that inspired me to share with you one of the mistakes that I have made in the fish keeping hobby. And it somewhat mirrors one of the mistakes that John talked about, and kind of has the same takeaway message that I feel like really needs to be driven home. And so I thought, you know, it's something that a lot of people may not be aware of, especially people that are very new to fish keeping. Really, specifically people that are very new to fish keeping. This is something that you need to hear when it comes to buying fish and bringing them home to your aquariums. Now here's the thing. I've been keeping fish since I was something like 8 years old, somewhere in there. I don't know exactly, but I was little when mom and dad got our first aquarium in our house. My aunt gave us a 30-gallon aquarium. That tank is actually in my garage currently. I still have that tank. But you know, mom and dad got that tank from my aunt. She was done with it, gave it to us. They set it up and everything. We went to the pet store and we picked out some fish and all that. And ever since then, I've been hooked. So I've been keeping fish ever since I was a little kid. So I've made plenty of mistakes. And growing up, the only information I had about keeping fish was a thin little booklet that talked about, you know, the aquarium cycle, and it had a few pages of different types of fish. You know, it had them categorized as community fish and cichlids and saltwater fish, and you know, just brief little bios about a few of the most popular fish like neon tetras, that kind of a thing. And other than that, and my own experience, was really all I had to go on. Just learning as I go, and that one little booklet is really all I had to work with for the most part as a kid, because we didn't have the internet until I was a teenager. You know, and even then, as a teenager, you know, when I'm living at home with my parents, I wasn't allowed to go on forums and things like that to learn about fish, because, you know, chat rooms are where the internet bad guys come in to snatch you away in your sleep. So I wasn't on chat rooms, you know, forums, that kind of a thing, to learn stuff. So I was still kind of just learning on my own even after I had the internet. But you know, I would go to fish keeping websites to learn things if I had a question, that kind of a thing. So I said all that to say this. One day, I was probably, you know, I was old enough to drive because I went to PetSmart on my own, but I was still living at home and all that. And I had a 10-gallon aquarium in my bedroom, and I had a BETTA and like some neon tetras, you know, that kind of thing, in just a 10-gallon tank on like a dresser, you know, nightstand kind of a thing, something like that, in my bedroom. And I go to PetSmart, you know, I'm looking around, I'm looking at the fish, you know, because every now and then you just want to get a new fish. And I'm looking around and I see something that was the coolest thing that I'd ever seen in my entire life. It was freshwater, and it was tiny, and it was a puffer fish. And I don't remember if it even called them Pea Puffers on the sticker at PetSmart. It may have just said dwarf freshwater puffer, and you know, they got that little small half an index card that tells you what you need to know about the fish, that it gets to this big and it's freshwater and it's, you know, green for community or red for aggressive or whatever. And looked like I found this super cool little teeny tiny freshwater puffer fish that didn't get very big and would fit right in my 10-gallon. And you know, this is awesome. It's a puffer fish and it's tiny and it's freshwater. I can keep these. This is amazing. But here's the thing. I didn't go get like a new tank and set up a new tank for these guys and prepare for it or anything like that. I saw dwarf fish, fresh water. All right, I've got a sweet new community fish that I can take home to the tank that I've already got, that, don't forget, has neon tetras and a betta in this 10-gallon tank. And so I tell them, I'm like, I want 3 of these. These things are so awesome. They're super cool. I want 3 of them. PetSmart employee doesn't ask any questions. They scoop them up, put them in a bag. I take them home, and while they're floating, you know, getting temperature acclimated, because, you know, not having access to the internet, not having been taught anything other than what I've been figuring out on my own, I don't know if I even knew there was such a concept as quarantining fish back then, you know, so I'm just gonna add them to my tank. What I'd been told about adding new fish is make sure you float them to get them to temperature and pour them into a net so that you don't add any of the old tank water in with your tank. That's what I knew, so that's what I was rolling with. And so while they're floating in the tank, I go to the computer and I start Google searching them, you know, to figure out what to do to keep these guys. Keep them. I've already bought them. I didn't do any research before I bought them, and that is the lesson that I want to drive home in this video. Never, ever, 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 ever.
Later that same evening.
Ever, ever, ever buy fish without doing your research first. Learn what you can about that fish before you buy it. Don't do it after you bought it. I'd already bought these fish, and then I go to the computer to see what I can learn about what to feed them and how to take care of them. At least I had the foresight to do research on them. Granted, it was far too late because I already bought the fish, but at least I didn't just buy them and just throw them in there. I did at least do some research. And when I'm looking these fish up, I start seeing stuff like, oh snap. Oh snap. This might not have been a good idea. These might be a little hard. Because I start seeing about how that they won't take prepared foods. They won't eat any flake food or pellet food or anything like that. Like, that's not good. And they'll only take frozen bloodworms if you can get them to take frozen bloodworms, and some people aren't able to get them to take frozen bloodworms because sometimes they won't take anything but live food, and you know the frozen bloodworms are dead, and so they just kind of sink, and that's not interesting to them, so they won't eat them. So you have to do things like get, you know, California blackworms, which at the time I didn't have access to, or you know, snails, and wasn't crazy about that idea, but you know, I'll do what I gotta do, you know. And so I go ahead and I release these Pea Puffers in this 10-gallon tank again with neon tetras and a veil tail. No, he was a crown tail betta, a crown tail betta, and Pea Puffers in a 10-gallon tank. And I go back out to the pet store and I buy some frozen bloodworms so that I can, you know, see if I can get these things to eat. Can't get them to eat. They won't eat any of the frozen bloodworms. I tried for days. They won't eat any of the frozen bloodworms, won't eat any prepared foods. It's not going too well. So I go back to PetSmart and I tell them, I'm like, I need some snails. And they had a tank that was just chock full of snails. They're like, you know, mystery snails or anything. No. I want snails to feed to some puffers. I want your trash snails that you don't want. It's like, okay. So they get a bag. They take their hand and then scoop up, or not their hand, I'm sure they used a net, and scooped up a big old pile of, you know, random, they weren't even mystery snails. They were just, you know, pest snails, a whole ton of them, and put them all in this bag. But the thing is, they weren't like the bladder snails that are real easy for these puffers to eat. They were some kind of little trapdoor snail. They had, you know, a little trapdoor that when they pulled in their shell, you couldn't get to them. And so I put those in my tank, and, you know, and the puffers were hunting them, and that was awesome. I see them, you know, like circling around the snail, and then they strike at it. But then as soon as that snail closes up, no access. And these guys still weren't able to eat, because as soon as these snails close up, they can't get to the snails. So the snails are impervious to these little pea puffers, and so these guys are getting hungry. And the hungrier they got, the meaner they got. And the meaner they got, the more my other fish started to suffer, especially, you guys remembered I said there's a crown tail betta in this tank, right? I come into my room and I look in my fish tank, and what do I see but my crown tail betta darting as fast as it can from one end of the tank to the other, just back and forth and back and forth, with a pea puffer hanging off of its tail. So I'm like, great, this is awesome. I've put 3 little bombs of death and destruction into my 10-gallon tank. They're terrorizing my other fish. So I did what I could do. I did have, luckily, the 30-gallon tall was downstairs in the living room, and it didn't have anything that the betta couldn't cohabitate with. So I took the betta out of the 10-gallon tank, took it downstairs, put it in that 30-gallon, and it was able to live out the rest of its days there in peace and happiness without being tormented by these pea puffers. But it still didn't work out, because again, I couldn't figure out how to feed these things. I couldn't get them to eat the bloodworms, couldn't get them to eat the snails, or they tried to eat the snails, but they couldn't get enough to sustain themselves even off of the snails. And eventually the poor things finally starved and didn't make it. So long story short, we have these things now in 2019, you know, a decade and a half or 2 decades later after this all happened, called smartphones. And even if you're making an impulse buy, today I still make impulse purchases. I go to the fish store and I see something, you know, I've gotta have that, you know. And I'm in a place now where I can make an impulse purchase because I've got extra tanks that I can set up if I need to. I've got sponge filters that I can grab out of one tank and put them in a new tank to have things already going and set up a quarantine on a moment's notice, that kind of a thing. So I can make an impulse purchase, but even still, it's so important, don't ever buy a fish that you don't know how to care for. If you're not prepared to feed it and keep it throughout its life, if it's gonna outgrow your tank, if it's gonna terrorize your other fish, just don't buy it. And how do you find that out? Just whip out your phone at the fish store, get on the Googles, and figure out what you're gonna need to do for this fish. All you gotta do is just Google the name of that fish and you'll find something, whether it's on Planet Catfish, if you're looking at some kind of catfish, or you know, you'll find a forum or some kind of fish keeping website that tells you what you need to know about that fish, how to feed it, what its temperament's gonna be like, what its tank size requirements are. Do your research, even if it's just at the fish store, do your research before you buy your fish. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I hope you give it a big thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that bell notification icon so that you don't miss next week's video. You guys are awesome. God bless you, fish nerds. I'll see you next time.